Right, we're in Deuteronomy chapter 11 now, and we'll read verses 1 to 12, reading from the NIV. Love the Lord your God and keep his requirements, his decrees, his laws, and his commands always. Remember today that your children were not the ones who saw and experienced the discipline of the Lord your God, his majesty, his mighty hand, his outstretched arm, the signs he performed and the things he did in the heart of Egypt, both to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his whole country. What he did to the Egyptian army, to its horses and chariots, how he overwhelmed them with the waters of the Red Sea as they were pursuing you, and how the Lord brought lasting ruin upon them. It was not your children who saw what he did for you in the wilderness until you arrived at this place, and what he did to Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab the Reubenite, when the earth opened up its mouth in the middle of all Israel and swallowed them up with their households, their tents, and every living thing that belonged to them. But it was your own eyes that saw all these great things that the Lord has done. Observe therefore all the commands I am giving you today, so that you may have the strength to go in and take over the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, and so that you may live long in the land that the Lord swore to your ancestors to give to them and their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. The land that you are entering to take over is not like the land of Egypt, from which you have come, and where you planted your seed and irrigated it by foot as in a vegetable garden. But the land you are crossing the Jordan to take possession of is a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven. It is a land the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of the Lord your God are continually on it, from the beginning of the year to its end. So this section, it kind of splits into two. The first part, verse 6 or 7 verses, it starts off with a command from God, which is given a number of times in various forms throughout Deuteronomy, which is, love the Lord your God and obey him. As it says here, keep his commands, his decrees, his laws, his commandments. And then has the warning. Remember what has happened. Remember how you have experienced the discipline of the Lord. Now it talks about, it says that your children haven't seen this. And all the men over 20 years old, who were over 20 years old when they refused to go into the promised land, at this point are dead. Well, virtually all of them. Joshua and Caleb are exceptions to that. And obviously Moses himself. He says, you've seen what the Lord has done. You've seen how he disciplined Pharaoh and the whole of Egypt. You've seen how he's disciplined you, your own people. The bit in verse 6 is referring to the time when the sons of Korah rebel against Moses and the ground opens up to swallow them. That's in Numbers, I can't remember which chapter, off at hand back, Numbers 13 or something like that. But no, it might be a different chapter. And one thing we need to be aware of, because sometimes we think when we see examples of God's wrath and God's judgment, oh, that's just Old Testament. But if you look at the New Testament, any time it refers back to these sorts of things in the Old Testament, it says these are a warning of how serious God's judgment is. So the first thing that we learn from this is, well, we've got to take God's commands seriously. Disobeying them leads to serious consequences. But then he goes on in verse 8 to 12. It says, the key thing there is that it's taking you into a land of milk and honey. It says you need to obey these commands, then you will have strength to take possession of the land. If we want to do all that God has for us to do, we need to be obedient. And then he gives a key difference. The land you are entering is not like the land of Egypt. Now, the land of Egypt was completely reliant upon the Nile, and on the Nile flooding periodically, and then irrigation providing water for the various plants and crops which they had sown. It says the land you're entering is not like that. It's different. It's a land of mountains and valleys that drinks rain from heaven. It's a land that the Lord your God cares for, and the eyes of the Lord your God are continually on it from the beginning of the year to the end. And see, they were used, although they had been used to living in the land of Egypt, and that was how things operated. It says, now in the land I'm taking you to, things operate on a different principle. On the principle of God taking care of you. And that the eyes of the Lord being on you and on the land continually. And God looks after it. And we need to understand that we are in different circumstances. We are in a different kingdom. And the eyes of the Lord are upon us and upon the circumstances of our lives continually. Doesn't mean that everything's a bed of roses. You know that from your own life. And if you read the Bible, read the New Testament, you'll see life is not a bed of roses. Sometimes things are extremely difficult. But if we look at our lives in terms of how the world operates, we won't understand anything. We'll be confused. We won't get anywhere. It is our lives that God's eyes are continually upon us and upon the circumstances of our lives. I just suggest, call upon you, meditate upon that fact. Amen.